So the topic of Titanforging and Warforging has been kind of a hot button issue recently, and I decided to make a video talking a bit about what I would personally do if I were to be in charge of Blizzard right now, at charge of the headquarters, and I only had one decision to make: what to do with Warforging and Titanforging. Before we get into the actual issue, I think it's a good idea to talk about why it's an issue, and why is Titanforging even a thing. I'm fuzzy on the details, but it came back around Cataclysm, Mists of Pandaria time. In Mists of Pandaria, we started getting Thunderforging as an opportunity for people to get slightly better upgrades from bosses they've already done, whether normal or heroic mode of dungeons. And heroic at the time was the highest. We didn't even have a mythic thing until Siege of Orgrimmar. So the brand new system came in, and the reason Blizzard even implemented the system was a little bit weird. It wasn't anything that most people could say, yeah, I remember that being an issue with my guild, but this was their example. They said, let's say you have like a raid and there's 4 bosses, and you can take on 3 first bosses fairly easily, but the 4th one has been giving your raid and guild a bit of a trouble. And for the last 4, 5, 6 weeks, you just can't kill the last boss, but the first 3 are a joke. They're doable, and you guys have done them multiple times. You just, for whatever reason, can't take care of the last boss in the raid. So Titanforging, and I guess this Warforging and Thunderforging is what they called it at the time, was the system to help people that are struggling with the last boss to have to do the first and second and third boss and have a chance to get an upgraded version of their loot. And that would maybe help that guild kill the 4th boss. I don't really know. I don't know a single person that can say, oh, we had this issue, but thank God to Thunderforging, now we could finally take out the last boss. It just sounds to me like, from somebody who raids in Mythics, and someone who does Mythic plus keys all the time at like 10s, 11s, it just sounds like it's an issue of maybe mechanics, or just a simple issue of like, get good? I don't really know. Anyway, that kind of brought in the system of Warforging and Titanforging, and for a while it hasn't been an issue. It wasn't really an issue in Warlords of Draenor, or wasn't a major issue. It wasn't really a major issue either in Legion. Of course, there were a few people that grumbled at the idea that, well, how come you could have somebody go into a mythic raid and get a trinket and it's like 380 item level, but somebody in LFR could go into a raid, do it on LFR version, and get a 390 item level Titanforged version of that trinket. Now, that didn't happen often. It was just a very unique luck. It was just the best RNG you could think of. So it wasn't an everyday occurrence or anything. But yes, with the Warforging system and Titanforging, the Titanforging is kind of like, okay, you get a piece of gear and then there's a roll if someone Titanforges. That means it gets a higher item level and basically more stats. But that Titanforge can re-roll off of its own Titanforge, kind of like Windfever procs way back in vanilla. So you can have multiple Titanforging until that piece of gear is capped out at its best quality. And you can get it from World Quest, you can get it from normal dungeons, heroic dungeons, mythic dungeons. You can get it from LFR version of raids, normal, heroic, and mythic. But there was generally like a cap at which like the highest was the ceiling of Titanforging. But a bunch of pieces of gear like LFR loot and mythic loot all could reach that cap if you got really lucky. So now we have this system, and as of recent in Battle for Azeroth, it has definitely been an issue. Why is it an issue in the first place? The reason it's an issue is because, well, a lot of people have been throwing around this, I guess, imagery of going to McDonald's and buying fries. And then somebody could get, somebody pays $5, they get fries. Another person goes $5, they get fries, bam, and it Warforged with a drink, bam, and a Titanforged, and you get a free sandwich, bam, and now you get extra big-ass fries, but you still paid $5. So people are saying that, hey, we're putting exactly the same effort, but somebody just got super lucky. And I didn't get that lucky, so what is this? It just doesn't feel good, it doesn't feel satisfying. So that's the thing that the Titanforging Warforging system is doing with the RNG. It can make the feeling of progression feel unsatisfying. If somebody is putting effort, somebody is going in ham with Mythic Plus dungeons or raids and they get that piece of loot, there's usually never that envy. Somebody worked their ass off and they got a piece of gear. But sometimes when you're just doing a random dungeon with somebody and they just get super high Titanforged piece of gear for basically doing nothing, it's even worse if that person didn't really pull the DPS, they don't really know what they're doing, and bam, they just got rewarded with a brand piece of loot gear. it can definitely feel dissatisfying to a lot of players. So I feel there's a couple of ways you can fix it, and it has to do either with out of satisfaction of gear, a little bit of player envy from like what did other people get, as well as the general RNG of gear getting. Now the best way, I think, and the easiest way to fix Titanforging and Warforging is to create a bigger cap to it. Like, you can't allow a LFR trinket to have some insane kind of Titanforging where it's now a 390 piece of gear. Maybe have it like, maybe at most a baseline or almost a heroic piece of gear at most, but maybe even not even that high. Kind of like how they have Warforging and Titanforging caps with weapons. In Battle for Azeroth, for a lot of melee classes, a weapon, a better weapon, is a huge DPS increase because it makes your auto attack swing a lot harder. And a lot of melees and classes in the game, most of your damage is auto attack, so increasing the damage of your auto attack is a direct damage increase to your classes. Because weapons are so lucrative for a lot of melee, Blizzard has to put a cap on how high they can Titanforge or Warforge, so there's definitely a limit to how strong they can get. If you were to apply the similar limit to all the other pieces of gear, like let's say if you're doing LFR, if you get lucky and if you get, let's say, Warforge, a 5 item level Warforge, or maybe getting speed or leech or avoidance with Warforge is fine, but a Titanforge should only be maybe maximum 10 item levels. Maybe 10 item levels on the socket, but not something like 20 item levels. Then there would be definitely a cap to how strong and how great a gear you can get. For example, if you're doing a normal raid, the gear drops from there is 355 item level. The gear that drops from heroic is 370, so that's a 15 item level difference. Somebody does normal set of raids and they get a drop and it's Titanforged, the maximum item level that piece of gear could have is maybe 365. So it would still be 5 item levels less than a heroic, but at least it would be a decent chunk of gear where you could take that piece of gear and maybe try to transition from normals, which are fairly easy, to heroics, which are a bit more challenging. But it wouldn't allow somebody from 355 baseline to get like 385, which would mean that they're getting gear that's better than that of a heroic drop. Another way to eliminate dissatisfaction and even the RNG factor, because I think one of the biggest issues with BFA, if you are talking about gear, is the RNG. I feel like, for at least from my personal experience, doing Mythic Plus dungeons, making sure I get my 10s, 11s, and I'm pushing my keys, I'm pushing my Raider IO score, I'm trying to get better, I'm trying to learn, and I'm doing more damage in dungeons, and when I get, let's say at the end of the week, a crappy reward, it just doesn't feel satisfying. It makes me feel like, well, I did all this effort, I pushed all this effort, I tried so damn hard, and I just got a pair of bracers that gives me mastery, which basically makes me heal the boss instead of do damage. And it doesn't feel great. So I feel like another way to eliminate the RNG, and this was suggested by my guildies actually, is to bring back some kind of a token or a currency system. For example, let's say you're doing your Mythic Plus dungeons, and maybe there's some kind of like Valor system. Like a Valor currency that we used to have way back in previous expansions. You're doing your raids, you're doing your dungeons, and maybe there's a Valor cap to that dungeon. You collect Valor over time, and eventually you'll be able to turn in that Valor to buy a piece of gear directly. Whether it comes from a raid, where it can cost more Valor, or it costs a bit less from Mythic Plus dungeons at a set item level. The Valor system, in a sense, would solve the issue for anybody who tries hard at the game. So anybody who is a tryhard, who loves to do PvE content that's actually somewhat challenging, I'm saying Mythic Plus dungeons, and maybe at least heroic raids that can do them every single week. They will be able to earn this Valor currency and eliminate at least parts of RNG of their gear. After so many weeks or so many runs of Mythic Plus dungeons or so many raid runs, they'll finally be able to buy that one piece of gear that their class or spec needs. And they'll be able to better suit themselves and better stat themselves. And it'll be one of those systems where they earn it, they work for it, rather than they just keep rolling the slot machine and just having the game spit out random pieces of gear, sometimes more gear, but gear they don't really need. It also, I feel like, would help eliminate the issue of people just being able to have insanely high item level pieces like 370s, but still push like only 6k DPS. Where people obviously don't know how to play their class, don't really have a reason to improve because they could just do LFRs and normals, and they'll just randomly get a random piece of gear for no reason whatsoever. So it's a system where people don't really need to improve or play better, and they just get showered with gear. Instead, it will incite people to want to improve with their classes, because now if they improve, if they get better, they do harder content, they'll be able to actually work for pieces of gear. It'll be an incentive for you to get better at the game, to look up a guide, to sim your character, to perform better. And it would decrease a lot of the envy of watching players that actually try, watching players that don't really do much or don't try, don't put themselves, don't really commit, get showered with the best pieces, and you create this envy between the communities. Like, I feel the Warforging and Titanforging systems aren't inherently bad. I feel that when you're playing the game and you're running the same dungeon, the same raid, the same fight that you've already completed, and then at random moments, you've done it multiple times, you get a Titanforged version of the same trinket you have, or a Warforged, it is a little bit exciting. It does give people a reason to rerun some of the content they've been able to do, and to maybe even go back and help their friends. Let's say you got a friend or a group of friends and they're struggling in a boss on normal. You're thinking, okay, normal doesn't drop anything for me, so it just feels like charity. But if you're someone who raids and you're like, okay, well, maybe if that rain Warforges or Titanforges the boss drops, maybe I could actually use it. Maybe I could use it for my off-spec. Who knows? So it gives people a reason to rerun the content. And I feel like it allows just a little bit extra duration of freshness to the same old dungeons, same old raids that you've done before. I feel like it's inherently not bad to just be randomly given, hey, you got a random chance to get a little bit better loot. It's exciting, it's fun, but the fun stops when it's just too much and it impedes into aspects of gameplay, or makes players feel envy against one another. When somebody tries the hardest and doesn't really get rewarded, and another person that doesn't try at all and they just get showered with some of the best loot in the game. It definitely does take away a little bit of that whole working towards something, progression, learning, making mistakes, learning from mistakes, and being able to surpass those mistakes and just not getting loot for it because it's all random chance, compared to not really paying attention, not really trying, and just being absolutely lucky. There's a fine middle ground, I feel like, and Blizzard needs to figure it out. I feel that the brand new BlizzCon coming out very soon is going to be the place for them to finally come back and say, we are making changes, we are doing stuff. I mean, wouldn't it be hilarious if somebody on Blizzard stage walked up and said, here are all the things that we're doing to World of Warcraft that are changes for the better, and it's actually good ideas that a lot of the community members have been putting out, and then say, and these changes are happening right now, and they snap their fingers and half of the computers get the update, but the other half have to take a bit of time. I think it'll be awesome, and Blizzard definitely has an opportunity in this upcoming BlizzCon. Maybe that's why they've been a little bit quiet about a lot of the things. They've been doing a lot of the Q&A stuff, but it feels like they've been getting softball type of questions. So I'm expecting a lot out of the new BlizzCon. I might even make a video on my expectations for BlizzCon for not just WoW games, but all the different games and updates coming out in general. What are my thoughts? If you guys want to see a video something like that, let me know in the comments. I'd love to make a video on that. But anyway, thank you guys for watching this video on the topic of Warforging, Titanforging, and I guess the general RNG stuff of Battle for Azeroth. Let me know in the comments what are your thoughts, what are you guys thinking, and I'll see all of you guys in another video.